Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Debbie Ingalls. I'm the director of the Cool Climate Enology and Viticulture Institute here at Brock University. Welcome everybody back, both in person and online, to the 2024 lecture series. It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, CCOVI professional affiliate, Dr. Kevin Ker. Kevin's been affiliated with CCOVI and Brock University really since CCOVI started back in 1996. Prior to this, he spent almost 17 years with OMAFRA as a specialist for tree fruit crops, grapes, and integrated pest management. And then he opened up his own consulting firm, KCMS Consulting, and worked with local growers on their issues for many, many years until he recently tried to retire. He developed and taught, along with Dr. Wendy McFadden-Smith, the Grape IPM course for the OABI undergraduate students here at Brock for many years, as well as filling in for teaching grapevine biology and cultural practices during the sabbatical leaves of faculty members. He did his PhD at Brock and has worked on collaborative research projects in CCOVI on such projects as the multicolored Asian lady beetle, the development of Vine Alert, the grapevine cold hardiness assessment program now used across Canada, and completed many NRC projects for wineries and growers. He provided independent advice as part of his consulting company to wineries, growers, industry, and academia across not only Canada, but also the US, until about 2020, when again he tried to retire. In 2023, he was lured from semi-retirement by Perennia of Nova Scotia to act as a viticulture consultant for Nova Scotia to address industry needs and advice on all aspects of viticulture production, including recovery and future opportunities, especially after the severe polar vortex of 2023. So today, that's what Kevin's going to talk to us about, the Nova Scotia grape and wine industry with his presentation, Nova Scotia Grape and Wine after the 2023 polar vortex. So please join me in welcoming Kevin.
I think back, and that's a lot of writing of somebody who, I was lucky to work with a lot of really great people, so that's kind of why you stick around. As was mentioned, I have been going to Nova Scotia since the early 2000s. This past year they had a rather severe event. Their viticulturalist that was there had unfortunately resigned in January, and they had a polar vortex in February. So I reached out and said, well, I think I might be able to help you a little bit, which turned into spending a week a month on the ground in Nova Scotia for the rest of the year. And it looks like I'm doing it again this year. So sometimes you think you get out of the loop, but you get drawn back into it. And I don't mind. What I'm going to do is give you a little bit of background of Nova Scotia, just to bring it along for you. So I'm going to talk about is the background in the cultivars of the industry itself that's there. What's their financial impact? What is Tidal Bay? This is kind of their signature for Nova Scotia, if you're familiar. Where do they grow the grapes? It's kind of like saying you grow grapes in Ontario. Well, it's really not the entire province. Though in Nova Scotia, they're doing it like Ontario and trying to spread out all over everywhere. What were the weather impacts, the actual impacts of the vortex itself? Some of the stuff that I did in 2023 of collecting data and where their industry is going. And in many cases, when people think of Nova Scotia, the first thing they think of is lobster. And they like to eat it. But they've also figured out that lobster and wine go together. So the wine business is not missing out on matching their wines to the maritime food. And that's a big part of for the other part people think of, well, what else? The Bay of Fundy. This is Hall's Harbor showing high tide, low tide. It's phenomenal views of what you see. Or Lunenburg, everyone's familiar with Lunenburg or Peggy's Cove, or going out on whale watching. I mean, this is a province that has so many things. So if someone was looking to work there, there's a lot more than viticulture, but if you're a viticulturalist, you'll have a great time and the options of seeing all kinds of stuff. So this is just a picture of one of the vineyards in season. Looking out in the distance, that's actually the Bay of Fundy, an incredible view. I mean, when you get a chance, it's kind of like when we think about some of the views in Niagara or other places, when you get that majestic and your chance to see the distance fall out in front of you, it really is incredible. So that's what it looks like in the summer, and that's what it looks like in winter. I took this picture actually in December last year. What was unusual for them is that they actually had snow. Despite what we saw in the recent news, which was Cape Breton area, it's a maritime climate, so they have a tendency to warm up in the winter. So they don't accumulate a lot of snow. They get snow and then it vanishes, and then they get snow and it vanishes. For snow to stick around is kind of an unusual occurrence for them. So where did the industry come from? They traced themselves back to 1611 with the first planting near Bear River. Bear River's in West Nova Scotia, not really up in the traditional area. And then in 1980, a fellow by the name of Roger Dial started Grand Pre Winery, and he had his first commercial vintage. So when you think about it, we're in 2024. That's only 44 years ago that they really just started to get back into grape growing. They've been a little bit here and there. Less than 2 years, the Grape Growers Association of Nova Scotia was formed. The people that were going to be in it decided they needed to have a bit of a voice. Not a lot. If you notice, it took, in 1999, there were only 3 commercial wineries. Yost, Grand Pre, and Saint-Famille. So, again, not a big industry. In 2002, somewhat similar to what's occurred in Ontario, the Winery Association of Nova Scotia came into being, and then in 2020 they changed their name to the Wine Growers of Nova Scotia. So we have kind of 2 organizations that are there. It would be nice if it was a single organization, but that's just the evolution of where it went. So in 2005, so we're talking only 19 years ago, 18-year growing season, there was only 125 acres and 9 wineries. That's still, I mean, Debbie knows and others in here, I know growers, single growers that have far more acreage than 125 acres of grapes right now. In 2012, there was a marketing push put on. A fellow by the name of Peter Gamble had been down there and talked to them to create, he said, you need to produce a signature that people of Nova Scotia can hang their hat on for marketing. And they came up with the name Tidal Bay. It fit the tides, everyone knows Nova Scotia, that area. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what is Tidal Bay and go from there. By 2015, there was 94 grape growers, 17 wineries, and 650 acres. As you can tell, with almost 100 growers and 650 acres, you don't have a lot of big growers by any stretch. You have a lot of small 1-acre, 2-acre parcels. In 2016, the Nova Scotia provincial government said, we think that the grape and wine industry has a place. We want you to expand. And so they put in a planting assistance program. You had to put in a minimum of 5 acres. They gave a listing of varieties that they had to be. There was supposed to be site evaluations done really well, but let's just say maybe some of them weren't done as well as what they thought. So by 2022, they're up to 1,500 acres and 23 wineries. 7 years. 7 years to double, you've over doubled, 2.5 times your industry in production. And you've got more than double the number of, or at least you'd increase your wineries. They had a lot of small wineries. The challenge was 2022, Hurricane Fiona came through. And that was in late September. And I'm going to show you kind of what I call the 4 steps of the apocalypse that almost happened in Nova Scotia. And then 2023 was just a bizarre growing season, which I'll explain to you. So I wound up going there and walking into a system where it had been somewhat regular, and now it was totally upended. Here's the grapes that they grow. This is how many cultivars are being grown in Nova Scotia. So you can see for vinifera, there's about 400 acres in total, and there's about 1,100 acres of hybrids. Chardonnay, far and away, is the most dominantly planted vinifera, because they believe it's the hardiest, but not necessarily. And people thought Riesling would do well. The challenge that they have is their growing season is not particularly long. So they're really stuck. That's why I'm quite surprised with Cabernet Franc being on the list at all, because the growing season, I don't think is truly long enough to get a really mature. But some of the others that are earlier ripening, if you look at Pinot Meunier, Pinot Noir, they kind of push it earlier in the season they're trying. But again, they're very sensitive to winter. In hybrids, the biggest cultivar is Lacadie Blanc. For those that are unfamiliar with Lacadie Blanc actually is is a Vineland breeding program selection. A fellow by the name of Ollie Bratt was the grape breeder in Vineland. And this was known for many years as V53621. Well, that's not really a very sexy name to put on a wine bottle. V53621, not going to work. So they took it there, they embraced it, and they cultivated it. It became part of their backbone of their industry, and they renamed it L'Acadie Blanc because the Acadians and L'Acadie is well known throughout the eastern maritime area. Surprisingly, they grow a number of muscats that fit in as well, and they go along. So you'll see New York Muscat, and then they're also moving into some of the more hardy Minnesota varieties because they were worried about winter. As you notice, Marquette is in there, Frontenac Blanc. So it's an attempt for them to try and diversify. With that, though, comes challenges. You certainly can't take this many varieties and make single varietal bottles. It's just not going to happen. The vinifera, they try. A lot of it's blended, but they will try a single varietal Chardonnay or Riesling and do it on a limited extent. So the Ontario industry is big. For those of you aware of it, and BC is big. Nova Scotia is actually a reasonable size industry. $245 million of economic impact. They have an industry that attracts, they've figured that the wine industry alone is responsible for about 150,000 visitors a year to the province. So the economic spin on this is coming out. And these I got from the wine growers group. They have about 1,100 jobs, full-time, direct through the economic impact of the grape and wine industry. So it's not a small situation. Remember, the whole province of Nova Scotia only has about 1 million people. So 1,100 jobs is a fairly significant industry, especially in the agricultural side. So what is Tidal Bay? Tidal Bay is an interesting little creature in that it was developed with the concept to create the signature wine, as I mentioned. Like the VQA style that's done in Ontario, all the grapes have to be grown within Nova Scotia. They are not taking grapes from New Brunswick or PEI or anything else and allowing them to be used in Tidal Bay. So the amazing part is there's over 20 cultivars. And I have a great challenge because when you buy a bottle of Tidal Bay and you look at some of their percentages, each winery makes a different Tidal Bay, but they all call it Tidal Bay. So as a consumer, I can see the challenges of trying to be consistent of saying, okay, here's the name, I want to go buy that, I know exactly what I'm going to get. The other part that comes into play, because so many varieties are used in it, they change from year to year in percentages. So it's a little bit more a game. Will the 2022 Tidal Bay taste the same as the 2021 or the 2019? Those kind of things can come in. So it's important to realize. So they allow 51% though. In other words, the bulk of the bottle content has to be either L'Acadie Blanc, Seyval Blanc, Vidal, and Geisenheim. These ratios can go, but the bulk of it has to be of those varieties. And then you can see the other 49%, they've allowed for all kinds of things to go in. Now, there are some new varieties that are going to be grown in Nova Scotia that I expect are going to become part of this. There's one that's actually come out of New York called Valvin. Muscat is one. There's some of the Peewee, the disease-resistant cultivars from Germany that they're looking at very much so because they are looking at the industry and wanting to make sure that they're also ecologically responsible. So anything to reduce pesticide use, they're a big plus. And they do have a growing, not large, but a small contingent of organic growers as well that are working hard within Nova Scotia. So here's the growing regions. So what I mentioned before, it's not the whole province, but they are. But this is something that I had to do to try and break it down into kind of growing zones. Now, to put in perspective, there's like 6 growers on the South Shore. And there's like 4 growers really in central Nova. And then up in the upper area when you get into western Nova Scotia up in here, this is probably where the largest winery in Nova Scotia is. This is Yost Wines. They're by far the largest processor. And then they have, and I always like this is NMB means North Mountain Bench. Everyone looks for a term that they can attach, very much like the bench in Niagara, the Lake Shore, and here, and all kind of for marketing. Southwest Nova has a little bit. There's some amazingly in Shelburne down here, and there's some as far up as Digby up here and Yarmouth here. But it's one vineyard in each spot. The one vineyard, I will tell you at the beginning, that probably did not have a lot of winter damage was actually located in Yarmouth. It was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. He's a retired fisherman. He had stuff in it. I was in shock. I was in shock compared to everything else I saw across the rest of the province, and I'll show you some of the pictures. And there is a small, there's a small group that are trying to grow them actually in Cape Breton. If you watch the news, yes, that's where the 1.5 meters of snow fell in that massive storm that rolled through Nova Scotia. Up here, North Mountain Bench and Mid-Valley, Gaspereau, and Minas Shores, up through here, they got about 45 centimeters of snow. So it's like anything on news, they always show you the biggest rather than showing you what everybody else got. So what happened? This is a real quick one. I mentioned about the 4 plagues. Then Hurricane Fiona, then final record-breaking events. Well above average early winter temperatures, which resulted in reduced winter hardiness. They had a drought like spring. Do you remember all the forest fires in Nova Scotia they were reporting on the news? That was it. Then, all of a sudden, in the middle of June, the taps turned on, and there's one. 53 out of 92 days from June through August, they had rain. They had 2.5 times the normal season rain in 3 months. So they went from forest fires to basically some spots that were floods. Never seen it. And then to top it off, in the first week of September, Hurricane Lee came rolling up, so they had to go through and try to harvest. I admire these people. I admire Nova Scotia. I really love the province, but boy, if you told me that that's what I was going to get, you really want to question your sanity at times, I think, that you're going to have to deal with that kind of stuff. So this is just a couple of quick slides showing Fiona as it went rifling up relative to the other map. And then they had their forecast lows. The vortex came in on February 3rd and 4th. They hit -26 in Halifax. For some of the varieties that should have been on the cusp, but I'll explain why this was actually damaging. Normally they get protected as well by the Bay of Fundy in here, there, and the North Shore. Even the ocean didn't protect it. It's very much like when we've had major freezes and we try to rely on Lake Ontario to protect the Niagara Peninsula, and it just doesn't do it. It's overwhelmed. This was just where some of the major fires were, the Tantalon fire, so again, the situ. And then finally, summer rainfall. These are some of the things. So June 1st through August 31st, all down through here, the South Shore had, well, Bridgewater, 900 millimeters of rain. They had a point up here around Windsor, which is just up in this area, where there was so much rainfall that the river was going to flood the dikes. It was going to go over the banks. They were so worried that the river was going to break. In a single storm, they were showing, there's an example, Bridgewater got 262 millimeters in a single storm event. It was mind-boggling. And then just a quick one to show the average that by the 15th of September, they were way above. The black line here is the average, and the red line is, that's what they got last year. So not far from 2019, but it's just the way it came. It was just such a massive increase. And then finally, Hurricane Lee. I landed, I got back one of my trips. I was in Nova Scotia 7 days after Hurricane Lee went through. Fortunately, all the grape growers, whatever grapes were going to be harvested, they actually picked everything prior to it. They learned from the year before of Hurricane Fiona, get the grapes off the vines or you may not have anything to process. Well, they were already in a short crop situation, so they just kept continuing. They said, let's just get what we can and get out of it. And I'll show you a picture of what happens when you get have a vineyard nearby and you get salt spray from the ocean. And the fact of what happens to the leaves on the vines is not good. So again, just a reminder of what the growing areas are. So why is this important? Harrison Wright of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada of Kentville does low temperature monitoring, very much like the Vine Alert stuff that is done. Jim does with the programmable freezers. I did for many years. And he broke it into 3 areas: central part, southern part, and what he called the northern part of the province. So here are the average temperatures. And on the right-hand side, you can see minus 27.1, minus 25.2. The southern area was a little bit better. It was minus 23.7. Depending on where you were, there might have been some fluctuations. But the dilemma was this lasted for 30 hours with 40-kilometer-per-hour wind at the same time. Now, I don't know how you feel, but I can go out into a winter storm with a nice parka and everything on, and I can probably last for a couple hours. But I don't think I'm going to last in a parka for 36 hours and then throw 40 km winds on top. Grapevines, yes, they're dormant and everything else, but that's still incredibly hard on the vines. And they're showing actually that extremely prolonged temperatures that may not be as cold as what you think for damage will actually damage the vines. And that's it. That was pretty much what happened. So here's the other thing was the difference in bud hardiness. And the most surprising thing were the hardest vines lost their hardest, or did not get as hard as they should have. 3.5 degrees Celsius temperature difference between the absolute low that they could have survived, which normally would have been minus 28.8 for Lacadie and minus 29.7 for Marquette. They only got to minus 25.4 and minus 26.3. So if you remember the slide before where they were showing temperatures at minus 25.6 and minus 27, even those varieties were getting damage. You would have expected in a normal year, minus 28 should have handled it. 2023, it just didn't come through. So this was just, again, a bit of things that went on, much warmer than normal, severe weather event, and then AAFC did a lot of the work. It was just wacky weather for the season. When I was there, we did a pile of survey work. We wound up accumulating, at least have come up with what I feel now is at least a reasonably good database of growers, contacts, acreages, and everything else. A lot of this stuff was sort of there, but not completely there, and that's what I was given the task to do. I offered to help out, originally thinking it might be 1, maybe 2 trips, which turned into week-long visits for the entire summer, every month, because we had to collect the data and produce the information. I made, while I was there, like, covered the province, 50 separate vineyard sites whenever I was there as much as I could, did Zooms, did webinars, had to write blogs. It was just, retirement was not in my wheelhouse for last year. So we got what was interesting out of the growers when we sent out the survey work, and I feel pretty happy with this. We got over 50 growers reply to us and tell us information. So we were able to come up and we had, of the 1,100 acres of hybrids, 690 acres reported. So we had 62% of the total acreage giving me, telling me, and providing me with information. I think most places, when I talk to them, if you can get a 20% response in your survey, you're pretty happy. 62 and 63% for the acreages, I thought was pretty darn good to get that. But it also showed that half the growers were growing well over half the acreage. So it's kind of there. So we looked at it. I tried to do some work on vine spacing. That was a challenge unto itself because they had all kinds of stuff going on and had been told all kinds of things prior to. So, and the major wineries. In some cases, when you go into an industry, you know, growers may talk to you, but the wineries don't talk to you because the winery. I was incredibly lucky. The wineries I have connections with from, well, some of them are former students at CCOVI that are involved with them. I talked to them in the deal that I made with them, and even Perennia that hired me. So Perennia is like the Ministry of Ag and Food, except they're a Crown Corporation in Nova Scotia. I made the deal with the wineries. I said, you give me the information, and no one but me will ever see this. I will bulk the data, but no one will ever know where it came from. I can say how many wineries, but no names, anything. So I was lucky. Probably if I was a full-time employee of Perennia, I don't know if they'd ever let me do things like that, but as a consultant to them, but they also recognized by the end of the season, the CEO of Perennia came and talked to me in length about, how did you get all this? I said, you got to build a relationship with people, and that's a big part. So the cultivars, again, that we looked at, there's some of the vinifera that we looked at, and the white for the hybrids. The primary whites are Lacadie Blanc and New York Muscat. They do have, I've never run into it. Osceola Muscat was a new one for me. They're growing another one called Valvin Muscat, which is coming in from New York State, because they like the Muscat flavor in the blend of the tidal blade. But it matches the maritime palate and food. So it's one of those classics of sometimes somebody from the outside may say, oh, this is just bleh. No, it works and it's good. And when you're there long enough, it gets really good. So it's just something to never throw anything out. I used to have I had a challenge with, I'll call him I don't know what you should call it. Well, Donald Zeraldo had always told me we were looking at varieties, and he was very strict on this, and I'm going, don't make it so narrow that you're not ready to deal with the future, because there's going to be stuff come along, and you may back yourself into a corner without thinking it. You know, you want to be exclusive, you want to do this, but then again, you have to look at what can happen, and Nova Scotia is doing it. So basically, I had to go in and I looked at it and I said, okay, some of the varieties are going to have some crop, so we classified them as recovery. Renewal, no crop at all, but will the plant be alive and can we get it to reestablish itself? And finally, the last one was, to quote Monty Python, dead is dead. It's bereft of life. And you're not bringing it back. And I had a challenge with a number of growers that they would see a vine start to give a little tuft of growth in one spot, thinking, oh, I can save it. No, just give it long enough. It's the last gasp. And so it's come along. So here's an example of what we were looking at. So the canopy doesn't look too bad, except normally there would be far more leaves and far more shoots. And these were pruned in many cases, and I'll show you the pruning, where they left 3 to 4 times the number of normal buds and canes to try and get anything to grow. Some renewal, yes, they started, if we could, around the head, or we looked at from the base, we would bring suckers up. And again, another example of, there's no fruit, but these are vines that are in the renewal. Or suckers from Lackady, some late season growth. So there was optimism coming along, at least stuff was going. The dilemma was, again, a very dry spring. The bigger problem was, incredibly dry spring, you don't get bud very fast. So we didn't see this for the longest time. And there was a lot of people that were right on the brink of questioning whether there was anything alive in many spots. And then it came. Some vine death, they're going to have to replant in some instances, and then there's other ones where, when it looks like this, you know that's pull it out and start again. The infrastructure in Nova Scotia really isn't there, the hard part. There's no real commercial people around that do custom trellis work. When they had the planting program, they could bring in the GBS planters, but there's no one in Nova Scotia with a planting machine. There's no commercial nursery within Nova Scotia, so they have to buy from outside. These are all things that they need to work on to achieve a little bit more critical mass, to be a little bit more self-sustaining. But these were, in many cases, 60% of the vines were dead. And I said, 60% are dead this year. Within 2 years, the other 40% are probably going to be dead. They may hang on for a little bit, or you may have a vine that looks great. It's the outlier. You can't work with that. There was no standard vine spacing. I saw spacing down as narrow as 60 centimeters between vines and 2 meters between rows, up to 3 meters between rows, and probably 1 meter, 6 meter, 8 between vines, all over the map, and every bit of in between. The tight spacings were done more on the vinifera than it was on the hybrids, and people are learning, because now the tighter the spacing, the more specialized equipment you have to have, and they realize now under a severe winter freeze, well, this may not be exactly what they want, but they are going to work with it. So I had to come up with numbers of vines, because we were trying to estimate vine numbers across the province. So again, they looked at it, and it's been done here in Ontario. Here's an average spacing for this, so we can come up with some ballpark vine numbers. This is probably the telltale numbers, and the ones I'm not overly thrilled about, but here. Average vine death for the vinifera was 45%. In other words, I estimated that there's almost 330,000 dead vines right now. That number will grow. Hybrids came through better in terms of death. They only had about 70,000, or 6% of the vines. That's workable in a vineyard. You can deal with 6% vine death random throughout a vineyard or even higher in some spots. The dilemma was here for the vinifera, the ones that were alive, we were having a real problem of only roughly a third of them were actually throwing reasonable suckers. So that's why I think our numbers are going to drop in terms of what's going to be available. In terms of the hybrids, they were much better, 14%, but they didn't need that many suckers on the weakened, highly weakened vines. There was absolutely no crop, zero, none, nada, bupkis for vinifera last year. Not. There was, and I keep emphasizing, they did. There was 1 ton at one place from Yarmouth that came in, but that was a 12-acre block. And they walked through and they picked whatever they thought they could get for the winery just because. All of the hybrids had some reduced crop. There was not a vineyard that went unscathed. And that's a really critical part that I'm dealing with the Nova Scotia government and talking to the Minister of Agriculture about was everybody got touched. There wasn't as if hybrids came through, even though our numbers were better. And the average yield was anywhere from 33 to 56% of normal. So they moved right along. Processing, as I said, no hybrids. If I took the hybrids and worked it through, it was only 46% of a crop. When you need stuff for tidal bay, and you've only got 46%, you know that the wineries are going to have a huge challenge. They admitted they could survive, but boy, they need to recover reasonably quickly because tidal bay, again, is 100% Nova Scotia grown grape. So they may let them bring grapes, or maybe it may happen, but they won't be able to put it in a tidal bay bottle just because it'll totally contravene their standards. So what were the challenges that I ran into? Well, some people had long spurs, some people did multiple canes, some went to very few canes, some didn't prune anything from the year before. There was no single consistent way to make it work. The basal bud one, in terms of cutting back hard, seemed to have a little bit better response than the others because that's your hardiest buds in the vine. But when we get into 50 and 60% primary bud damage, then I know that there's going to be trunk damage and cordon damage if they're cordons. The other thing was crop was clustered around the head, if that's the only place where the buds were coming from, or they were falling onto the ground, or they had uneven fruit set because of the weather. This all led to another challenge. Vinifera, no crop. If we looked at New York Muscat at some places, they had no crop. New York Muscat is supposed to be hardy. It's supposed to survive, and it didn't have any fruit. It did grow, but it didn't have fruit. Or Lacadie that had more of a fruit crop than people had anticipated. Much of the fruit that were showing up on the hybrids were from tertiary buds, secondaries and tertiaries, not from primaries. Then the infamous weed control. Anybody who grows grapes knows that the minute you are training suckers up, well, that eliminates using herbicides. Well, again, they weren't really geared up to cultivate, control weeds with equipment other than herbicides through sprayers. So this is going to lead to another challenge for this year coming forward. These are all carryover things. Here's the weather challenge that I mentioned before. So if you look at Kentville in the middle, 19 days of June. Now this is predominantly from about the 10th of June onwards. 24 days in July and 10 days in August had rainfall. How do you control diseases under those conditions? 24 days in July, so not only did they have a chance where they had a window to spray and they put on a pesticide, and then 6 hours later or less than 24 hours later, it was all washed off. It created all kinds of challenges. But I give them marks, people worked hard. Pest control, really odd thing. And this one on the left was something that I found. You can't really, it's hard to see, but there's this brown, and it's dirt all the way up the trunk. And this was not a single occurrence. I saw this in many, many vineyards. Ants trying to get out of saturated soil. They said, we're getting flooded out, our house is getting flooded out, we're moving. And they started, and the colonies were going up the trunks. Wouldn't have believed it. if I hadn't seen it. But you could tell that was the premise that was going on. Crown gall. It's going to come in with a vengeance, and it has already started. They don't have a lot of insect pests. They're really lucky. They don't have great berry moth, but they have a few other things. They have Japanese beetle starting to appear, which they never had before. Phylloxera is probably one of their bigger issues, and the other one is because of the high hybrid population, Iranian mites. Huge populations of Iranian mites. Phylloxera, Deb Moreau at Agriculture Canada is doing a lot of work on phylloxera, and so she's been really good at helping, trying to set up some models or ideas and monitoring systems so people can time things. There's not a lot of products, but we're trying to look at things. Iranian mites, we're looking at finding better ways for them. Sometimes it depends on materials they have, what they can use. I think a number of people are going to start looking more at the oils, early season as a suppression approach for them. So I think that'll go along pretty well. And the other one was the regular rain, and downy mildew came out with a vengeance. It decided it was going to beat the daylights out of, and it didn't care where you were or what you got. People had downy mildew. So even if you had a little bit of fruit, you still wound up with infections of downy mildew coming in, which complicated it even more in trying to look at the fruit quality that was coming out of it. Black rot. Not a lot of places with black rot, but they do have it. The other thing that the East Coast has that we don't see as much in Ontario and BC, anthracnose. Another issue. The dilemma with black rot is that there are no good organic controls for organically certified materials that will control black rot. And people are trying to be organic in Nova Scotia as best they can. This is going to create havoc because once it establishes in an area and builds up an inoculum level, like all diseases, it takes a long time to try and reduce that inoculum back down to more manageable levels. So this year is going to be even more critical for them. The hard part is many growers had no income. So basically, they spent a lot of money last year with no money coming in. To try and convince them to spend extra money this year is going to be a challenge. There are some support mechanisms they're looking at, but it's something to be aware of. The other thing was that vines and the ones showing late in the season, all of a sudden, they started to regrow because the soils dried out, the weather got warm, and suddenly they started throwing shoots again. So the vines weren't hardening off going into winter. They weren't starting to get properly acclimated going even into this. So far, knock on wood, they haven't had any cold temperatures to the point where there's likely going to be some bud injury, but it's something that had me incredibly nervous. That one down here, this is a vineyard. This, if you notice, no leaves. That's the ocean. When hurricane or tropical storm Lee came in, the winds were so big and the size of the waves, and it hit break walls, and it created a salt spray that went for hundreds of meters inland and covered. And this guy's vineyard got covered. And when I went there, I was there a week after, all the leaves were gone. Every leaf had been basically salt toxicity. It just didn't take it. And the other one was a lot of things with grapevines. I've run into this periodically in Ontario, and I've seen it in BC in a few spots. Aerial rooting. The vine has gone into a shock mode of saying, we have something wrong, we need to form roots. Because the cells of a grapevine are totipotent, in other words, they can form roots, they can form shoots, they can do whatever they want. They were trying to form root initials and go out, but then when it got dry, all you see is the remnant of a lignified and aerial root. I'm not sure exactly what this is going to turn out to be in the long run, but again, oddities that you run into. I've been doing this, my first summer working in research, and to today, if I add the numbers up, this is my 47th year of doing this stuff. And I've only seen these things a handful of times. So it's, I really date myself when I say stuff, but that was my first summer at Agriculture Canada and Vineland when I worked on pest control and things. That's what I call my first summer really working in kind of research with grapes and stuff. It's amazing the stuff that you run into. You never stop learning. And here's an example of when they had the massive rain. I've seen this in Niagara-on-the-Lake. I've actually been down in vineyards one year, and I have pictures showing the same thing for when all of a sudden it was so flat, the tile draining, all the tiles, all the road drains, everything was absolutely full. There was no place for the water to go, and they had much water. I saw something similar to that as well on Pelee Island one time, and they had a massive storm come through, and they flooded the vineyards, and the flooding was so bad they actually found fish in the vineyards. Now, there's no fish in this one. This is from a creek running by, but on the good side is the vines, that water was gone in less than 36 hours. So I think they're gonna, it's something to watch. So what are the current concerns? And time is working just about right. I'm concerned about the vine collapse and the vine numbers and what's gonna happen to them. I'm concerned for growers that they're gonna try and recover their losses. They're gonna see buds grow this year and they're gonna put too much crop on a weakened vine and may result in problems. We went through this in Ontario. Dr. Ingalls will remember 2003, and also in 2004, people had a big crop, and then 2005 came along and said, you shouldn't have done that. And so that's what I carry to these people when I go give my advice. I said, I've been through this before. I've watched this. Be aware. Weed and disease control are going to be huge because of the inoculum levels that are left over. Vine sourcing, going to be a huge issue, but they do have, and I'm sure Sud is aware, they can do virus testing for specific stuff in Nova Scotia. So for some of the hybrid people that use own-rooted plants, at least they can check their plants ahead of time. And Dr. Wright is looking at the impact, he's trying to look at the impact of viruses on the hybrids, because they don't seem to be quite the same as what we're noticing with vinifera. And there's going to be a change. There's going to be a rebalancing of the cultivars being grown. There was a big push for vinifera. Everybody wanted vinifera. Well, I think some of them now are going to say, hold it, we have to start taking a look at risk management and balancing our portfolio a little bit better and going along. All of these people, and I want to give credit to them because these are the people that helped me out for the year. Jennifer Haverstock, who is the director at Perennia, and Lisa. Lisa came along. She'd never really worked with grapes, but they hired her as a research technician to work with me for the whole summer. We covered the whole province and everything else. Nova Scotia Department of Ag and what they're doing. Steve, the Grape Growers Association of Nova Scotia really helped me out. I was at their annual meetings and all kinds of stuff and seminars. Harrison Wright and Deb Moreau of Ag Canada, again, wonderful people. And it's important to recognize some of the Jörg Stutz of Grand Pré, Gina Haverstock is a graduate, and well, Rebecca is as well, of the CCOVI program, working out there with Devonian Coast. They're the largest processing winery in Nova Scotia. And Lightfoot and Wolfville, Josh Horton was one. He actually went through the Niagara College program that's out there. But these are people at least helped me. Sometimes you can be frozen out, and I wasn't frozen out of it. I was actually brought into the system and really lucky to access the data. And these are the people that really help. And with that, I've got one other slide than this one. So this is Jennifer and this is Lisa. Lisa jokingly would take every time I was down there, she'd take those selfies in the car and then post them on the Perennia blog site saying, he's here. and people would phone and try and organize trips. So I guess I'm leaving it wide open right now. I'll have one finished slide at the very end, but for any questions here or from the web or people that are watching, if they are watching externally.
Yeah, Ron's just excited to get a copy of your slides afterwards.
Yes. Yeah, I'll make sure there's a PDF available and it'll get posted.
Thanks, Kevin. Time for some questions. So Kevin, I have a question. Just wow, a lot of hits to the industry, back to back. What sort of financial support are they getting both provincially and federally to help weather this storm until, they can balance and figure out what the future is going to be?
So the Polar Vortex fits the criteria for ag recovery, which is the federal level. And people in Ontario got some monies from that. It's about 18 months, though, after the point of when you start the process. It's never as fast as they hope. The Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture and I had announced shortly after the Vortex that all of horticulture in Nova Scotia was going to give, they were being given $15 million to allocate to the industries to help them deal with the Vortex situation. But this includes strawberries, high-bush blueberries, wild blueberries, raspberries, tree fruit, so anything, even vegetables, all part of anything that was a horticultural commodity. Far and away the largest support is going to be going to the grape growers. They've gone through phase 1 of getting them some monies to try and carry them through. They've opened up for phase 2, and there's likely going to be a phase 3 that's going to come along.
To me, it's not just the Polar Vortex, right? I mean, then they had, you know, these huge storms and the lack of disease control because of the, you know, just the sheer amount of rain that they had.
Yeah.
And all of those are additional stressors.
Yeah, and the interesting part, though, is that $15 million was to deal with the Polar Vortex. Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of time, that's why the vine death numbers, replant numbers, all of this stuff was highlighted more than talking about the actual impact, because every commodity in Nova Scotia fought with, I was shocked to find out how much damage there had been to their field crop industry because of the adverse weather. They have a huge hay crop, and they didn't harvest because it rotted in the fields. They couldn't get the hay off and get it processed. So I hadn't thought about all of these other commodities, soybean fields that were just flooded. So there's a lot of things that came into play, but the 15 million was for there. They are going to apply, is my understanding. I was trying to frame everything for them for ag recovery to follow the model that was used for British Columbia and Ontario getting federal money to assist. But they deal with, based on ag recovery, is to deal with extreme expenses above and beyond normal. But they won't pay for vines, and they don't pay for, like there's certain things that they can't, that they don't fund, that hopefully will come through. When I met the minister, he was at the annual meeting for the grape growers of Nova Scotia, so the room was packed, and he's in there. And he went to leave, and I was talking to him, and he said, you could see them, how the classic, they want to leave and take the door. And he got to the door, and I don't know what made me think of this, and I looked at him, and I just said, hold it! You can't leave! And hold it. Some bozo from Ontario, like me, telling the Minister of Agriculture, don't leave. And when he stood there, though, but what I did was I told him, I said, everybody in this room says thank you because you at least allocated some monies immediately for them. And he got a round of applause. And I said, the best thing that association ever had happen was they sent a minister back to cabinet feeling good. And he was going to be able to walk back in and tell them around the cabinet. So when they ask for extra assistance, which they likely will, they're probably going to have a better response because he was treated well. So that was my little luck on the side, but I thought about it when I left it after the meeting. Did I really do that? But then again, I'm known to do things that don't quite match the norms.
2 more questions have come in from online. Is there anything that growers could have done to mitigate the impacts of the cold snap? Or what should they do moving forward?
They don't, the type of event that came in, we have a lot of wind machines that are used to mitigate winter temperatures. Probably would not have worked. The winds that were associated with it, the wind machines wouldn't have been effective or been able to have been used. So that was one thing. However, in terms of mitigation, and it's part of what I'm doing this year is going to get them into, they don't do a lot of hilling of their vines and protecting and renewals and getting into that. So I think more are going to take a good look at it. I'm going to try possibly to pull out of, as I call it, pull out of the memory bank from way back. And Debbie will remember John Marinisson, when he started planting the first reds, he would always have a sucker come up from the bottom and lay it down and then bury it with soil. So it was there for the following year to be protected. And I think there are people that are going to try that. I've been listening to some really good webcasts and talking to a few people about different training systems to try and also reduce the amount of crown gall by almost going on a 3 to 4, I'm talking about 5 maximum year lifespan of a trunk, and then it's renewed. but always has other trunks coming back in place so they don't lose productivity on that. So these are the types of things that I think people are going to look at. Some of them will look at varietal selection, locations. There are areas that need site improvement, tile drainage, and some other things that I think can improve. But those are probably the two biggest ones. So some of the stuff wasn't going to change anything because it was such a big and massive event. But on the flip side, if they had been looking at some of the trunk protection or graft union protection that they hadn't been, they might have been able to get back into a recovery faster. And that's really the big thing is speed. Pulling out a vine and planting a new one, is a 3 to 5 year wait. If I've already got an established root system in place and I can bring new shoots up from the base very quickly, I now have a functional root system and now I can get a vine back much faster.
And the second question, on skills and experience, how are they going to support that when the NSCC has stopped V&E education?
Their one there was, yes, the Nova Scotia, for those that are wondering, Nova Scotia Community College has a 1-year program, not identical to the program here, but very much along a similar line for students. They were finding declining enrollment, so they've suspended it for a year. I don't think the program's going to end, but I think they want to reevaluate how it's offered and under what premise. They definitely need, in Nova Scotia, they do have a challenge of what I call knowledgeable labor. And this is one of their ways of trying to address that, to get people familiar with how things are going to operate. The big challenge is, as I mentioned at the outset, a large number of growers with very small acreages. So it's almost going to be that you're going to have to think of yourself working in this industry and being trained in the industry almost as an independent contractor to do work for people that because they'll never, I don't think they'll have the resources to pay you as a full-time employee. It just won't be there. We've used a rough ratio in Ontario, and I would probably say the similar one in Nova Scotia, that in theory, one person can manage about 7 to 8 acres of all handwork, because all of their grapes are harvested by hand. So you run the average numbers through. But there are periods of when things have to be done. So if you've got a grower with 3 or 4 acres, you really don't even make the economic plan or case to hire a lot of people. So you have to really look, and that's what's coming. So that's where that is. I'm aware of it. I talked to people about it while I was down there, but I expect you're going to see it back in another iteration, but it just won't be in the existing one. People from Nova Scotia have been coming here for education to Brock and doing well with it, and then going back. If someone, like I said, if I was 15 years younger, I'd be their VIT person now. Like, I would move. It's a place that has a lot of stuff going for it, and it's a lot of opportunity to grow with an industry that I consider very young. When you really, in 20 years, they went from 125 acres to over 1,500. In less than 7 years, they doubled their industry. So it's young. There's opportunity there, and it's a matter of coming in with good information and being well trained. Yeah.
Kevin, first of all, thank you very much for the nice presentation. Great work. Looking into the Nova Scotia grape and wine industry, especially the cultivars that have been growing, adjusting to vinifera, growing more hybrids, obviously, they are more winter hardy. What's the grower's perspective after this catastrophic event? Like they want to go with more winter hardy cultivars like land, or they want to continue with the more innovative ways to protect the viniferas. And the second part is like, what's your advice to the nurseries? Because most of the nurseries that are there here in Ontario, majority of them, they don't preferably grow the cultivars that the Nova Scotia needs, like the kind of land. So what's your advice?
Well, the one is there is going to be a rejigging. I think you're going to see the vinifera acreage slightly decline, not dramatically. A number of the wineries are making some signature varietal wines and doing it. plus they know that they can blend some of them in. They're going to rethink their practices of how they manage the vines and protect the vines. That was part of what I was asked to come in and assist them with. And so there are practices: hilling, weed control, sucker renewal, routine. There's a variety of things that kind of got lost for a few years, or really hadn't been thought about because they'd never experienced anything like this in their 20 years prior. Ontario, I remember when the very first vinifera were put in the ground, and the people that put them in the ground tried to treat them the same way as that they treated them in Europe where they came from, and suddenly found out that doesn't work here. So there was a relearning and reorganization and a retraining to become familiar. From the nursery side, they're trying, many of the hybrids, they go with own-rooted stuff. They are doing, and I've encouraged, and there were monies made available to them, that if they're going to propagate hybrids within the province, that they can get the virus tested ahead, which to me is critical. They're supporting that. On the vinifera side, yes, it's them. The challenge is to get them to buy the varieties they want on the rootstocks they want, and not just accept what's given to them. The other push is certified plants. Even the Nova Scotia industry recognizes you got to start clean, because if you start dirty, it will come back to haunt you. And so that's where they're going. A number of their vines come, at least the hybrids especially, come from Quebec, are coming out of there. So we're looking. The vinifera have come from Ontario, or they've imported from Europe. Some of them have come in, because some of the nurseries have connections. And I mean, even in Ontario, some of the vines, the rootstocks are brought in, they're grafted, or there's purchased finished vines. So everybody's trying. The dilemma is that with the previous freeze in Ontario and the replants, the freeze of British Columbia last year and again this year is going to put a huge push on the sourcing of grapevines. Even Nova Scotia recognizes it. But the varieties they're looking for are not quite the same spectrum as what's elsewhere. So yes, they're rejigging, and I've suggested that they want to take a look at, what their risk tolerance is at a grower level is really important. For self-propagation, there are people that there's some stuff. There's even some people looking at tissue culture work at Acadia University. So it's another part that's coming in. It's just here's the next push of helping a startup. And I think as a startup, I think there may be more opportunity now because there's going to be demand for the next 5 to 7 years. So as a nursery, I think in a small area, that's the part to encourage.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you said that Acadia Black, they were initially developed here in Ontario, Wine Research Center, and then probably popular more in Nova Scotia. We did a big virus survey in Monroe in Nova Scotia, and we found that that's the variety that has least amount of infection in Nova Scotia. So.
Yeah, it's a very funny thing going along, but like I said, when Lac-a-Dee Blanc, the class, like it was a cross from 1953, and it was bred for Ontario, but it just didn't fit. By the time it got into sort of the marketplace, I mean, not many in this room or people will remember Deshonac, which was 9549, and it was known as S9549 forever. But they said, well, you can't sell 9549 on a bottle, but you could put the word Deshonac on it, and suddenly it went. So it's the grape and wine industry is a lot of fun, and everywhere I go in Nova Scotia, if you really want to have your brain dig back to what you learned way back, I had to pull out a lot of stuff out of the where the moths were hanging out in the parts of my brain to rethink this and say, okay, but they're open to it. So I think it's there.
Any other questions? Kevin, did you want to go through?
No, I just think this is just something, these are the things that I have presented to the Nova Scotia growers, to the government, to Perennia, to their farm loan board and other ones about, okay, here are the things that we're all thinking about now. It's finally now kind of in print, and it's something that they can work towards, and they will, it's going to come, but they're optimistic. I mean, there's pessimism because financial hits are no fun for anybody, but all of agriculture is, oh, next year's got to be better, regardless of what you grow.
Well, please join me in thanking Here's a small token of our appreciation for your time today. And just a reminder for everybody, next week is our reading week, so we're going to take a little bit of a break from any seminars. Most of us will be attending the Ontario Fruit and Vegetable Convention. And then the week after, on February 28th, we'll welcome Dr. Ron Jackson, and he'll give a presentation on Wine and Health, a Reasoned View. So look forward to seeing everybody in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.